invited a friend of mine from New York.
Okay, we're going to record.
Showed
I'm
up.
going to ask
Jack,
everyone to please mute themselves. So we're recording. Okay,
okay.
good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy that you're here, to everyone both in person and those online rather. Okay, today is Wednesday. It is the 2nd of April, and we're getting ready for Parshas Vayikra. At the same time, we're also getting close to Pesach. So I hope today to share a couple. What's that? Just in case you haven't noticed, right? So I hope to share. Right. So I hope to share a few Divrei Torah that hopefully will enlighten our appreciation of Parshas Vayikra and also get us in the mood for some Pesach ideas. Okay, so let's see. Sefer Vayikra is what we're going to begin today, the third Sefer in the Chumash. And this Sefer Vayikra deals primarily with the Karbanos, all of the offerings that were going to be brought first in the Mishkan and then later in the Beis Hamikdash. So we're going to focus on a couple of them today. And here's the one. Hey, welcome back. So here's sheets if you'd like. Here, right here. So here we go. So let's see the first one. Today we're going to start with talking about the specific korban that was brought involving birds. There were a couple of bird korbanos that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, first in the Mishkan, later in the Beis Hamikdash. So let's learn a little about birds. So it says as follows. This is in Perak Aleph, Pasuk Yudalet and Tesvav. V'imina of Ola Korbanol Hashem. Let's say someone was bringing an Ola, that's a completely burnt offering, but instead of being a sheep or a goat or whatnot, they're bringing it from a bird. V'ikriv mina torim o mina bnei yonah as korbanos. So there was two types of birds that were acceptable for bird offerings in the Beis Hamikdash. One was a turtle dove, that's what we call torim, and the other was bnei yonah, young doves. So those were the two types of birds that could be brought as an ola. Tesvav, v'krivo kohen al mizbeach. Then the kohen would bring this bird to the mizbeach, umalak es rosho, and would nip off its head. We're going to talk about the process of malika a little bit in a minute. V'hiktira mizbecha, they would cause it to go up in smoke on the mizbeach, on the altar. V'nimtza damo al kira mizbeach, and some of the bird's blood would also be pressed against the side wall of the mizbeach. Now we're going to see one more pasuk because it's going to tell us about Malika again, this process, how a bird korban was to be brought and was going to be slaughtered, but it's going to add another detail. So this is in a few prakim in Perak Hey, in the 5th chapter, and let's see it, it's in pasuk Ches. V'evio samel kohen v'yikrivas asher lechatas rishono. So this is talking about, again, if there were a pair of birds that were being brought. I believe this is what a mother who had given birth recently. I believe this is what it's talking about. She would bring two birds, and it says v'krivas asher chatas rishana. So there was two birds that were going to be brought for the mom who just had given birth. One of them was going to be a chatas, and the chatas bird was the first one to be offered. Umalakis Rosho, and it tells us again, there's this process called Malika. Its head was going to be nipped. And then it adds another detail here too, and this is true about all times that a bird offering is brought with Malika, Mimul Arpo, that where does the Malika take place? We'll explain Malika in a minute, but it takes place Mimul Arpo, which means the back of its head, meaning on the back of the neck. Unlike regular Shchita, which, I feel funny, doing this on my own throat, but on a regular shchita, which takes place, let's say, on the front of a throat. So Malika, which we'll see in a minute what that is, takes place on the back of the neck. So that's what he's saying. We're gonna need to explain what is Malika, and also what does this mean it's taking place on the back of the neck. And it says Velo Yavdil, and a third detail, even though you're doing this Malika on this delicate little bird, and it's being done on the back of the neck, be very careful not to totally decapitate the bird. It's just going to nip its neck. It's going to be killed that way. It's going to be slaughtered that way, but it's not to behead it. Let's talk about Malika for a second. Here's a little known detail of Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash, first in the Mishkan, is that a Kohen who is going to be dealing with bird sacrifices would grow out his thumbnail. And that thumbnail would be grown out and it would be sharpened a bit. And that is the process of Malika. Rather than killing a bird, if it was going to be shechted, let's say if it was going to be shechted to eat, if someone was going to shecht a chicken or a turkey, it's got to be with a sakin, it's got to be with a razor sharp knife, and that's going to, of course, be on the front of its throat to cut its esophagus and its trachea. So that is going to be, that's with the that's shchita. That's where someone is going to eat the bird. But here, where it's being brought in the Mishkan or in the Mikdash as a korban, either as an ola or a chatas, or it's not going to be eaten, there was a different process that was used for slaughtering this bird. It was called melika. The Kohen, instead of using a knife, would use his sharp thumbnail. And basically, he was holding the bird in his hand. Let's say here's the bird's belly, and here's the back of its neck. He would use his thumbnail. That's umalaket osho. He would nip its neck using his thumbnail, mimul or pav on the back of the neck. So he basically would kill it that way with the back of his neck. I didn't even realize when I brought in a water bottle how helpful this is getting. Yeah. So he would use his thumbnail to kill it, and so we see three details: that the way it's killed is not with a sakin, not with a knife, but rather melika with his thumbnail, mimul or po on the back of the neck. And it also says lo yavdil. He's not supposed to decapitate it. He's got to be careful when he's doing this because this bird is a delicate little creature. It's got to be enough force that's there that's going to kill it, but it's not going to totally sever the head. Very, very different form of killing this bird. Now, I think there's a number of questions that this raises. I think the first question that's going to come to all of us is that, generally speaking, well, let me take a step back. If I were to ask anybody, I assume if I were to ask just about any thoughtful Jew to give me a reason, if they were asked by a non-Jewish coworker, whatever it is, to explain shechita to them, I think the first thing we would say is, well, it's the most humane way to put an animal down, whether that's a bird, whether that's a land animal, whatever that is. It's the most humane way. It's this razor sharp knife, and we want to cut its esophagus and its jugular veins. It's so fast that the blood is going to rush out so quickly that it's going to be dying the most painless death possible. And it's got to be razor sharp. Can't have one nick in it. That's what I think all of us will say. Nowhere in the Torah does it say this, by the way. The first author that puts this out there is a Rambam. Maimonides puts this out there in his Moreh Nevuchim, and you'll find that all the other Sfarim who deal with Ta'amei HaMitzvos, giving rationale or reasons behind, oh boy, they use this as well. So that idea that shechita is supposed to be as quick, painless, and the quickest way to kill an animal, that is the where that all begins is with the Rambam. Having said that, that's what we're all used to. What happened to that idea here? If we're looking to put down an animal in the quick or a bird in the quickest way possible, most painless way possible, Malika doesn't sound to be that way. So there's got to be some reason if we're going to get engaged. Now, obviously, we could just say chok. It's a chok, the same way God doesn't want to swear shatnez, it's a chok. Doesn't want to see chazir, doesn't want to see pork. It's a chok. We don't know why. But what our Sfarim do, you'll find there's a whole genre of Sfarim that are out there that propose ta'amei mitzvos, that propose theories, what might be at the rationale, what might be behind this mitzvah. So if we're going to get engaged with ta'amei mitzvos, as many Sfarim do when it's talking about shechita, it's going to really require us to wonder here as well. Well, what happened to those ideas of being quick, painless, and razor sharp? How big of a deal would it be to just, if you're ready, bringing a bird as a korban, put it down the same way that we would put down a bird that was going to be eaten? Why is this different? So that's, I think, question number one that's going to be on everyone's mind. And then question two, I think these really are all related, is going to be, if there's symbolism here, what is the symbolism that's going on? I think that's really all one question. What is going on here? We're going to see two different sources. We're going to see a Sefer HaChinuch, which is, I think, the go-to sefer for many of us when it comes to Ta'amei mitzvahs, to try to get a rationale or an understanding, to suggest a theory behind a mitzvah. And then we're also going to see a fascinating idea from Rav Sorotzkin in the Znaim LaTorah. So let's first see the Sefer HaChinuch. No, it's two. Well, it could have been domestic. It could have been raised. It's only two birds that can be brought as korbanos, either a turtle dove or a young dove. So, I mean, many times those are raised in dovecotes in people's, property, but they could be in the wild and stuff. Okay, so let's see, but we're not talking about a large animal. These are generally speaking, these are small birds. So let's go on the bottom of page one. We're gonna start with the Sefer HaChinuch, And we're going to see what he says. So in the first section, again, these aren't continuous. On the first paragraph is where he defines Malika for us. And then in the second paragraph on the left, that's where he suggests a reason. But again, it was in the middle of a larger piece. Let's see the first paragraph first, where he's going to define Malika for us. So he says, Shelo lahavdil arosh bechatas of. So he says that again, the Torah tells us that when Malika is being done, it's not supposed to be done in such a fashion that's going to decapitate the bird. It's got to nip it, it's got to kill it, but it's not to decapitate it. So let's see what it says. Shelo yafrida kohen mina of.
Chef is right, but when you're eating the turtle dove, is that
No, that shechita's from the front. Yeah. Well, generally speaking, whenever shechita is happening, we don't want to apply such incredible force because then we're nervous we're going to press down on the simanim that need to be cut rather than slicing them. So generally speaking, whenever a shochet is out there shechting a bird or a cow or a sheep, whatever it is, they want to gently move that knife back and forth. They don't want to put such force that what it might do is, push down on it because that could cause a treifa.
in these instances, the bird
Decapitated. No, but here's where the Torah spells it out, says, be careful not to do it. In other words, if it would happen, let's say this turtle dove is so delicate that in the process of the shochet gently going back and forth, he didn't stop after it was shechted and he cut off his head. It's not going to passel. What would passel it, what would potentially make it a treifa would be if he really pushed down with force. But let's say he didn't push down with force, but he was going gently cutting back and forth, but he just didn't stop after killing it and he cut off its head as well. It's not going to make it not kosher. But here the Torah says, if you're bringing it as a korban, careful not to nip off it, to decapitate it. So let's see what it says. Shelo yafrida kohen mina ofa bala korban. The Kohen is warned by the Torah, he's instructed by the Torah not to cause its head to be removed. What this is talking about, the Torah specifically says it's by the chatas, by the sin offering. Don't separate the head from the body when you're doing this process called Malika. Shenemar, the Torah writes, Umalakas Rosho, that you're supposed to nip its head mimula or po from the back of the neck. V'lo yavdil. Don't cause the head to be separated. Uperish malika. Again, what is this concept of malika that it really comes up earlier in the parsha? Who shenoetz hakohen tziparnov. The Kohen digs in. He puts in. He stabs, I guess, with his fingernail mimula or po from the back of the neck. Dahainu etzem hanikra etzem hamafrekas. The spinal cord. Is basically he's cutting the spinal cord with his fingernail. He cuts that spinal cord with his thumbnail. In other words, that cutting the spinal cord is not what kills it. That might paralyze it. But when you get beneath the spinal cord, then you get the simanim. The simanim are going to be the trachea and the esophagus. So he's going to start from the top, go through that spinal cord and hit the trachea and esophagus. I can't tell you how difficult that is to do. It's not something that I've ever done, and I don't think anyone's ever doing that because there's no reason to. Nowadays, there's no Beis HaMikdash. No one's going to be out there, practicing, first of all, growing their thumbnails out and then practicing. I am curious, because you hear about these groups of Kohanim that are learning the laws of the Avoda. So just in case Mashiach comes tomorrow and we have the Avoda, that they want to be ready to go. I am wondering, are they growing out their thumbnails too? That's what I'm wondering, because they want to, even if they would learn all about this, you got to be ready to put it into practice. The thumbnail's not going to grow in one day. So I don't know. Next time we're in Yerushalayim, you go to like Machona Mikdash, where they're trying to. That's what I'm wondering. If you see him, I've never heard of this. Yeah, but I've never heard. But I'm wondering because it could be there's these groups of Kohanim who are trying to be ready to go, but that means more than just intellectual. They would have to have. Let's see, next time I'm there, I'm curious. I'll ask about this. All right, let's see. Yeah. Look for it. Okay, let's see. He says again, Perish Malika, Shenoitz HaKohen Siparnom Mimul Arpo. He digs in his nail in the back of the neck, Dainu Etzem Nikra Etzem Afrekas, that's the spinal cord. V'chotech Etzem B'tziparnov, he cuts that, Ad Shemegil Simanim, until he gets to the crucial signs, which means the trachea and esophagus. V'chotech Gama Simanim B'tziparno, and he cuts those with his fingernail as well. Rubo Shalachad, and by the letter of the law, he doesn't have to completely cut both. He can even just just get the rove, the majority of at least one of them. V'zos hi shchitaso shel chatasov. That's how you shecht a bird chatas. V'tzarch sheichavena kohen, and the kohen's got to be really intent shelo yachtoch hakol gamri, that he doesn't totally decapitate it. Ad sheyeh nifrad harosh min haguf, that the head and the body are separate. V'al zeh ne'amar, that's what the Torah is saying. Lo yavdil, don't separate them. Okay. What might be at the root of this? Why might the Torah have suggested that if that this is the way the animal is supposed to be killed? Now the chinuch is not going to deal with the question of tsar and if this flies in the face of what we say about shchita. He's going to deal with another angle. Look what he says. V'shamati, you see in the next paragraph on the left. Okay, ve'inyan hamalika. He says, I've heard, and I would propose that this concept of malika, of nipping the bird, and that's the way to kill it if it's being brought as an offering. And this warning that the Torah gives, this instruction for the Kohen not to decapitate it. This is very specific to this type of korban. He says, what I suggest, he says, basically, I'm going to make my best effort to propose what might be a rationale for this. Lashiv ki ulai bidvar malika hanasis biad kohen bechatasov. What might be the reason why the Torah first of all insists on if the bird is going to be put down as an offering to be killed through the malika process rather than traditional shchita? And why is it the Torah says be careful not to decapitate? Shu karban shalani. Who brings a bird offering? It's specifically. I made a mistake before when I said this is talking about a birth mom. That's later. This is talking about a korban that either an ola or a chatas is being brought by somebody who cannot afford to be bringing an animal. So in this parsha, when we bring up the concept of bird offerings, they're specifically brought by an ani, someone who's not wealthy. And what is the Torah saying? Remez, the Torah is giving us a hint, suggesting to us that whenever we're dealing with someone who's poor, take care of their needs as fast as possible. Don't delay. And therefore, that's why, unlike every other korban, you don't find this idea that a kohen, if he's got that long fingernail and it's really strong, that he could kill a sheep that way for someone who's trying to bring a sheep offering. It's only by the bird, because the bird is brought by an ani. And the Torah is trying to tell us to drive the lesson home to us. How do we deal with an ani? Don't dilly-daddle. Don't take any more time than necessary. That's why specifically it's the ani's korban that does not require shchita. He shouldn't have to go find the knife and then do the inspection, run up and down his nail to make sure there's no nicks in it. By doing that, I'm delaying the ani. This fellow's already tragically so destitute, so poor. By keeping him longer in the Beis HaMikdash, we're not talking great deals of time. We're talking a minute. I'm causing him to lose work. I'm causing him, he might be, whatever he's doing for his low wages, he needs to be out there hustling, Ben Asayim. In that time that I'm requiring the Kohen to go get the knife and to check it, I'm taking a little bit more time from his workday. And also, Gam Lafliga Mehirus, and also to instill this lesson of how quickly we need to assist an ani and not cause a delay whatsoever. Amar sheyaschil mimol arpo. That's why this is the exception of all korbanos. We're told that it's to be slaughtered starting from the back. That is the most accessible part. I guess when someone's holding a bird, the natural way to hold it is, I guess, you hold it by the wings, so you're holding it from the back. So the part that's most accessible is the back of the neck. That's what's most accessible to his hands. Therefore, by the Torah saying, don't take, and how much time are we talking about? That's a fraction of a second. But the Torah is trying to teach us a lesson, is that we always say time is valuable, time is money. But it's as valuable as it is for us, it's incredibly valuable when it comes to an ani, because they're destitute. They don't have extra time. They don't have extra money. So the Torah is he suggests here. Again, ultimately, we don't know. Hashem said this is the way a bird offering is supposed to be brought, the process of malika, and to be from the back of the neck. But what he's telling us is maybe the Torah is trying to teach us a sensitivity about how we deal with an ani. When we find out someone is destitute and they need some assistance, let's jump right away to go ahead and help them. And let's not delay them whatsoever, because to delay an ani is to keep them away from their work, keep them away from their job, and time is money, especially for someone who's destitute. So I thought that's a fascinating angle. Now, again, he did not deal with the issue of the difference between shchita, about tsar b'alei chayim. I guess what the chinuch would say is that this is more important. The Torah is trying to really impart to us this lesson because it's telling us that we basically have to put on our seichel glasses, and if we're dealing with someone who's destitute, do whatever we can to assist them quickly, and don't drag our feet, because don't do anything which might cause a delay. I thought it's a beautiful idea, beautiful lesson. But let's see a little bit more on this. It just jogged my memory. I have a book at home. It's called The Book of Jewish Values, a day-by-day guide to ethical living by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. So this is a very good book. I have this at home. It's broken up into daily pieces where he offers ethical lessons that we can learn every day, go through the calendar. And they're short, easy to digest pieces. And I thought this was very insightful, what he's got here on page 2. So he's got here, he's calling this day 279, when you can't give money. Look at this one here. For an observant Jew committed to giving charity, the Sabbath can be difficult. What do you do when you see hungry beggars soliciting contributions on the one day each week that Jewish law forbids handling money? Because of this prohibition, I generally tell the beggars it's my Sabbath day and that I'm sorry, but I'm not carrying money. So I think writing this, you'll clearly see he's living in Manhattan at the time. Yeah, you clearly see. Yeah, he's going to bring this down because he's not dealing with right, and he's not dealing with Jewish beggars because they would clearly understand that. In other words, this doesn't happen to Yerushalayim. Even though in Yerushalayim you're used to seeing people in the corners, Shabbos you don't have any explaining to do. He's writing this here, obviously, where there's panhandlers and there's people on the corners. So you'll see soon that he's going to make it clear he's in Manhattan. But so he says, so I guess he's got the very nice practice. He wants to help a little bit what he can with the people. Recently, I was walking on the Sabbath with a friend, Ari Goldman, and his daughter Emma, who carried a box filled with food items. Maybe she had a little bag with granola bars, whatever it is. Whenever we came across a beggar, she gave him or her something, explaining to me I was uncomfortable passing by a beggar and not being able to give anything, so now I never leave the house on Shabbat without taking food with me. Emma's suggestion impressed me and reminded me that when a person uses her intellectual abilities to find a way to act more ethically, she can find a way to do so even when, like Emma, that person is only 10 years old. They have a Shabbat Shalom. So I thought this is a beautiful idea, and it fits well with that chinuch. The chinuch's telling us, now that we've got this lesson, let's put it to use. We were told not to dilly-daddle. We were told to never keep an ani waiting. How can that apply? Now we got to think about who do we deal with and how can we apply that to our own lives? Here's the way a little girl Emma did. Look at this footnote. This made it clear he's clearly in Manhattan. Halakha Jewish law forbids carrying anything in a public domain on the Sabbath, but the area in Manhattan where we live and hundreds of other localities throughout the United States has established an eruv, a closed-in space that constitutes a domain in which carrying items on the Sabbath is permitted. So I thought that was also very nice how Rabbi Telushkin slipped that in there. First of all, he's making it educational for anyone who might not be familiar with eruv, but he's also reminding if there's any Jews out there reading this book who may not be as knowledgeable, saying as great as an idea as what Emma's doing, just make sure you got an eruv before you emulate Emma. I thought that was very, very nice of it. Anyhow, so I thought that dovetails. Ooh, no pun intended. This goes very nice with that chinuch. Is that the chinuch is telling us is that perhaps what the Torah was trying to impress upon us with this idea of malika is to be extremely sensitive for an ani, for his or her time, and now to put our thinking hats on. How are we going to deal with an ani? What can we do not to keep them waiting? What to recognize time is money, and to see what can we do to help them because they're generally in need of assistance. Now, I want to share with you what Rav Sorotzkin does with this and does Naim LaTorah. He brings up the question of this idea of malika, using a fingernail, seems to fly in the face of everything we've been taught about shchita. So look what he does with this. Umalak. So I'm on the bottom of page 2 in the Aznaim LaTorah. So Sorotzkin says, Umalak l'divrei ha'omrim, according to those who had said, which really is the Rambam, and the Chinuch made it very popular, and then others did as well, but it really comes back to the Rambam. L'divrei ha'omrim nosnim tam, according to those who say, and they suggest a reason, l'shchita, that they say that the reason why God insisted that if we're going to kill an animal to consume it. It has to be properly slaughtered according to Jewish law. Uvdika sasakin. We can't do that without checking the knife to make sure there's no nicks. Shemishum tsar ba'alei chayim naguba. Because the Torah is incredibly concerned about causing unnecessary pain to any ba'alei chayim, to any living creatures. Shebarer HaKadosh Baruch Hu gam lebehema. God cares so much about causing pain to creatures. This applies to animals as well. And chaya, va'of, undomesticated animals. Oaf, birds, misa yafa, they deserve to have as nice a death as possible, as clean, as quick a death as possible, painless as death as possible. If that's the way Rambam and these others understand shechita, kasha. So you'd have to ask Rambam, lama gazar HaKadosh Baruch Hu malikas ha'of bekachim. Why, when it comes to kachim, when it comes to animals being brought as an offering or birds being brought for an offering, God says, shechita doesn't apply. Now we're dealing with malika. Well, what happened to that concern? There must be something bigger, some other overriding concern. So what the chinuch would tell you is that, yes, those concerns are important, but the bigger concern is to educate us about how to relate to an ani. That's what the chinuch would say. Let's see what Rav Sorotzkin does with this. Shehi b'tziparon, because he reminds us, how was malika done? B'tziparon, with the fingernail, mimula oref, and on the back of the neck. It's not even so quick. V'chotech sidra, and it involves cutting the spinal column, umafrekes, kodem, shemagil simanim, before you get to the trachean esophagus. Misa kasha beinenu. This seems to be a pretty harsh way to put this bird down. So he says, V'yesh shlomer, here's his suggestion. He's also going to say, as important as Tsar Ba'alei Chaim is, Hashem's perhaps trying to sensitize us to another area about an ani. Yesh lomer sharei amru. What do we say? Sheshchitas hakorban. This is the Ramban. This is Nachmanides' idea about the whole underlying philosophy behind korbanos, behind offerings in the first place. Ba kedei l'shaberes lev hachotei. The whole purpose of an offering, specifically a sin offering, according to Ramban, is to jolt us, to cause this emotional, jarring experience, and to really break a heart. Sheyitan alibo, that a person should begin to think, Shekol anasel korbano, everything that's happening to my offering, to this animal, roy slow, really should have been done to me because I rebelled against the God. I didn't listen to God's commands. Elashai barachamav, but God, because He's so merciful, mekabel shchitas behema, that once I do teshuvah, and now I'm bringing this animal, and that's going to be this jarring experience, seeing this animal slaughtered and quartered and burned. But Malcolm says about him, instead of me, that's going to rattle me to the core, and it'll help me in my tshuva process. And because of when a person sees all this and takes this in, he says, Yashuv al Hashem v'yirachameu. They'll engage in the full teshuva process. God will have compassion and forgive us. That's the Ramban's philosophy behind korbanos in general. So he says as follows. Rav Sorotzkin says, knowing this, Vinei ha'ashir, when we're dealing with someone who's got means, mefached mikol min misa. If you would ask someone who's wealthy what their greatest fear in the world is, they'd say death. I got a lot to live for. I've got a family I love. I've got a house to enjoy. I've got things I'm looking forward to doing. I've got all these plans ahead of me. So if we ask anybody who's comfortable in this world what their greatest fear is, they say death is a horrifying fear. I don't care how nice of a death it is. I don't want it. So that's what he says. Someone who's an ashir, it doesn't mean we're not talking about Jeff Bezos. We're not talking about Elon Musk, fabulously wealthy. Ashir means someone who's got means. Any of us, any person who's got means, their greatest fear is death. Afilu kala shebekalos, even if it would be the lightest and pain-free death as possible. Kitov lo balamazeh. They're happy in this world. They've got a family. They've got means. They've got things they want to do. They've got a bucket list to check off. Therefore, when they see their animal is slaughtered and quartered in the Beis Hamikdash, I feel a sakin baduk, even if it's with a knife that was checked and it's so razor sharp, so it's not causing any pain to the animal, yahar her b'tshuva. It'll still cause the person to do tshuva because they're going to say, I don't want that. As nice as that death is, as pain-free as that death was, I don't want that. I want to go on and live and enjoy God's green earth. That's what any person with means would say. Aval ha'ani, someone who's living in grinding poverty. Shu hamevi korbanov, and that's the person who brings a bird offering. Yeshu mevakeshes nafsho lamus bitzarlo. Unfortunately, there are people who are so destitute and they're so miserable with their lot in life, they wake up in the morning praying for God to take they're not gonna do it themselves, but they may be going through life praying for God to take them because life is just so miserable for them. Vishchitas karbano, when they see their animal gently killed in front of them, lo tishaberes libo klal. It won't rattle them at all. Because if anything, they'll say they might be a little envious. Wow, that animal is being put down in such a humane way, and this person might be thinking that they live under such horrid conditions. Maybe they might even be a little jealous of that animal. But even such a person, such a destitute person who may be praying for God to take him or her because they're so miserable in this world, the type of death they want is an easy death, a death without below yisurim, without any pain. It's specifically that person who needs to see a korban killed in a different. If we want to have a korban have an effect on such a person, that it will rattle them, that korban has to be put down in a different fashion, in a more call it a more violent fashion, you might say. So he says lish kazet to such a person, sarich laros, that person has to see she'im chayim kashim, that even though life is tough, yesha hamisa kashim ayem, there are some forms of death which are even tougher and more miserable. Tzarich laharos lo misa kasha. He has to visualize, he has to see a more difficult form of death, misa imisurin, death that involves some pain, malika, which is malika. He says, "Oaz, only then perhaps then that person might change his tune and maybe shaken up a bit, and then the korban could have a desired effect on that person. Because what's that person going to see when he sees a korban? If he sees it gently killed with this fine, nice knife, he might say, I'm a little envious of that. Life's so miserable. I wouldn't mind switching places. But if he sees it being killed in that way, then he's not envious of that at all. And now the korban might have its desired effect on him. Now it could rattle him and cause him to do his tshuva. I thought that's a very interesting answer. What Rav Sorotzkin is suggesting here is that it's only by bird offerings, because generally speaking, who brought bird offerings was an ani. And the ani, we don't want him or her to miss out on the whole point of a korban. The point of a korban is to rattle the person to the core and cause them to have a change of heart and shake them up and now come back to Hashem. If it wouldn't be this fashion, it might not have its desired effect on an ani. I thought that's a very, very creative solution to this. So we've seen two Divrei Torah here, two different ideas about what it is that Hashem may have hoped to accomplish with Malika. And the first, when we saw in the Chinuch, was a lesson for the rest of us, for all of us, thank God, who are not in the Ani category, and to educate us about being more sensitive to Aniyim. And the second idea from Rav Sorotzkin was focusing on the Ani, that Hashem wants it perhaps killed in this fashion as a way that even the Ani can gain from the Korban experience. But what you see is, from both of these suggestions, is they're saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, there's a plan for every mitzvah here, and every mitzvah is fitting a purpose, whether it's to educate us or whether it's to make sure that even the Ani can get the intended purpose of the Korban experience. So I thought that's a fascinating idea. Before we see the next of our Torah, I want to just go to, if you look at page 4. Let's look at page 4, a beautiful, beautiful story about Rav Chaim Ozer Grudinsky, because this is in the spirit of Pesach, and it's while we're focusing on the Ani. So let's see on bottom of page 4, or in the middle of page 4. So it's called, I got this from an article online, Providing for the Needy, in the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim. He tells you there where to find it. The Aruch HaShulchan writes, all the nation of Israel has the custom in the month of Nisan that we're in to collect ma'os chitim, to purchase flour for the poor for Pesach, or to give them money so they can purchase it for themselves. The custom of contributing ma'os chitim, literally that means money for wheat, is widespread. Not only do we contribute money to provide for the flour and therefore matzahs that are poor, but to provide as well for all the needed Pesach provisions. While providing this assistance is important, I bolded this, of equal importance is how the assistance is provided. We must do all that we can to assure that the recipients of ma'os chitim are not embarrassed by their destitute situation. In order to avoid the embarrassment, many communities or congregations have ma'os chitim funds, where a contributor gives the money to the fund, and only those responsible for dispersing the funds know the identity of the recipients. That way, a recipient never knows who's providing him or her with the charity, thereby reducing any potential for embarrassment. So I tell this to people all the time. They're like, people will every now and then approach me before Pesach. Do you know how, Ruvain or Dina, do you know how they're doing financially? And I say, why? They say, because I'm considering, giving them a gift for Pesach. I say, I got a great idea. I'd say, instead of you giving them that gift, which is going to change the dynamic of your relationship, because now he or her is going to look at you as a recipient, instead of that, do it through the rabbi's discretionary fund, because chances are we're already helping that person out in some fashion, whether it's throughout the year, whether it's for Pesach, and this way they know that okay, they're being helped by this fund, but there's no name and there's no face that's attached to it, and that's a way that a person could be helped, and no relationships have to be altered, no dynamics have to change, no one has to be awkward saying good Shabbos to the person at Kiddush. This is a much better way to do things, and I'll tell you that this is one of my favorite parts. Every now and then someone will ask me, a kid will give me an interview, will ask me for an interview, and I'll say, what's your favorite part about your job, above your rabbi? It's the rabbi's discretionary fund. It's such a fun and sometimes a sneaky way to help people. And we'll soon see about sneaky in a second, but it's a way to help people, and it's a way to help people and help them maintain their dignity at the same time, because it's not coming from me as an individual. And if people start profusely thanking me, I say, it's not me. I'm just an agent. I'm the treasurer. That's all I am. I'm an agent who's just distributing funds. There's people who want to make sure that your needs are met. So let's see a beautiful. I think this is perhaps one of the most beautiful examples of this. This was a great rabbi who lived in Vilna. He was world famous, and he died shortly before the Holocaust. So there's a beautiful picture of him smiling. That's Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudziński, or some people pronounce it in the Polish Grzinski, like more of that DZ mix, the Grzinski. So there he was living in Vilna before he passed away. So he says there's a story about Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudziński of Vilna, and you see he passed away in 1940. So it was after Poland was already invaded, but the full scale of World War II hadn't really begun yet, and he died right before that. So it says that vividly illustrates the concern we must have for the feelings of the recipients of the charity which we give. Before I share the story, everyone must have heard of this story before. There's a story that's out there about the Chafetz Chaim, that he was once on trial for someone. Someone had made some accusation against him. And he comes to court, and there was some people offering character defense, and people started to tell the most beautiful stories about his character. And the judge says to, I guess, whoever the attorney was, says, just be honest with me. These stories are just out of control. Do you really believe them? And he says, I'm not sure, but what I do know is that they're not saying stories like this about me and you. That's what he says. So sometimes, even if the story, you don't know if it's 100% verifiable, just the very fact that they're saying a story about someone tells us about this, because they're not saying these about us. So about Rav Chaim Ozer, everyone acknowledged that he was an incredible genius, and also had a massive heart, and would use his genius to say, how can I help people in a way that'll protect their dignity? In terms of his genius, again, I have no idea what to make of this story, but I've heard this from several sources. They say he was such a genius that he had such intellectual capacity that people who went to see him sometimes, he was extremely busy. Again, they didn't have computers and stuff, so questions coming into him, so he'd be writing handwritten responses. And they say he was ambidextrous. So they said that he'd be able to write two, letters simultaneously on different topics. I don't understand how that's possible. Again, compartmentalizing one's mind that way. I don't understand it. I've never seen anyone do it. But again, they're not saying these stories about us. So I guess that tells you something about his genius. I'm sure he was an absolute genius. So let's see. In Vilna, Rabbi Grudziński's concern and actions done for the welfare of the community, especially the poor, were well known. After prayers the night of the Seder, a man approached Rabbi Grudziński, who was standing in the front of the synagogue. You can imagine everyone's coming to wish good Yom Tov Chag Sameach to the beloved Rabbi Grudziński after davening. And he says as follows. He quietly told the rabbi, he leans in and he quietly tells the rabbi that he and his family had just arrived in Vilna that morning. He therefore had absolutely no provisions for Pesach and was hoping the rabbi could help him out. I heard it a little different. I heard the story that the person said, listen, my fortune changed. I had this incredible loss, whether it was the stock market, whether it was his business collapsed shortly before Pesach, and he just didn't have the dignity. He couldn't get off his high horse to ask anybody for help. So he's showing up basically Yom Tov night, telling Rabbi Grudziński, I'm about to go home. we have nothing to eat at home, and was hoping the rabbi could help him out. Rabbi Grudzinski wanted to help this man out in a manner that no one would be aware of the man's personal situation. Rabbi Grudzinski pretended the man had just come to ask him a halacha question. In a booming voice, he said, "It's not kosher. I'm sorry, but everything you prepared for Pesach cannot be eaten. It's not kosher." Like he made it out that he just got a story that the man's, house cat just dropped a bagel or something into their pot of soup, whatever it was. He gave a big clap on his shtender and he says, "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you. It's not good. It's not kosher Pesach. I'm sorry. It's chum. It's nothing you could eat. You can't eat a thing of it." People standing around the rabbi heard this decision. They felt sorry for the man, who they assumed had prepared a complete Pesach feast, only to be told he can't eat any of it. Immediately, the man began receiving offers of food and supplies from all the congregations. Right, someone's coming over saying, "Oh, my wife made an extra kugel and our kids didn't show up for Pesach. Oh, we had too big of a pot of soup. We got extra lemon." So before he knows it, the whole town is coming over, and so this is a way he got his mos chitin. His family got their mos chitin without anyone in the community realizing that they had suffered it. So that's sneaky. That's using, and sometimes you see these pictures of these great rabbinic luminaries, and they got sometimes this like little bit of a devilish grin on their face. And you're wondering like, what are they doing? Why are they looking? I'm willing to bet you this is what it is. Those great minds, this is the way they get to be devious. Everyone's got a desire inside them to be sneaky and devious. So I'll be devious. I'll be sneaky in a way that I can help someone. It's a satisfying feeling, and sometimes you can see that. So just looking at that picture of him smile with that twinkle in his eye, it just makes me think of that. He was able to have a complete Pesach celebration without having to ask others for food and without anyone knowing of his desperate situation. Beautiful story. So it's something to bear in mind, as it's really, really important to help aniyim. And those are what we saw from that first lesson from the chinuch, is that it's incredibly important to sensitize ourselves to help those who are less fortunate, to help people going through a difficult time. But as we're helping them, let's be really, really careful to help them maintain their dignity as well. It's not an excuse for the other. I was talking about this with my high school students the other day, and I told them something. I'll never get this out of my mind, is that I remember it's probably one of the probably one of the meanest things I think I've seen in life, is that when I went to a yeshiva high school that was primarily dormers. It was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So there was a small segment of the student body was from Milwaukee. Most of the kids were from Chicago. And then, I was coming from Cleveland. There was kids from all over. There was one boy in the high school from Denver. And it became readily apparent very quickly, like once he came, that there really weren't much in the way of finances in his home. We figured that out really, really fast. So comes winter break, there was like a 10-day winter break in January, and guys are talking and saying what they're going to go home, what they're going to do over the break, and this guy came up. He said that he's just going to stay in the dorm by himself because he was broke. His parents couldn't. His mom, they didn't have a dad. His mom couldn't bring him home. So one of the guys in the class found out about this and basically took it on himself that he was going to help raise money for this guy to get him a plane ticket so he could go home for winter break. And he did that. It was really, really kind of him. And that if the story ended there, this guy would go down and, that's it. But what I remember is for the rest of the year, this guy would be a little bit mean to him, would be a little bit unkind to him. And whenever anyone would say, or whatever he would say, "Hey, come on, that's not right," he'd say, "Hey, just remember, like I took care of getting you that ticket for winter break." Whether he would say that again, he was being a mean 14-year-old. Again, like this was not someone you see him now. This guy is such a gem of a person. He's such a pillar of his community. As a 14-year-old, he needed some straightening out. And again, I remember seeing that. I was also 14. So when you're 14, sometimes at that point, you're just not confident enough of yourself to say, "Hey, that's really not right. That's not, that's just not right." I'm sure some of the teachers, some of the Rabbi must have said something to him at some point. At that point, I still kind of kick myself saying, like, I wish I was as confident then as I am now, but none of us are, and I think we could all look back at times that we were standing on the sidelines as kids when we saw somebody else being mistreated, and we think we could have done a little better. That's one of my moments that I look back. So I was trying to tell the guys in my high school class, I was trying to tell them, let's make sure never to be that guy. If we're doing a kindness for somebody, do it right. Don't then, use that as an opportunity to lord over them, at a later point. And then a second point, if we do see that happening, let's figure out a way, how can we stand up for that, for that other person? Let's not be bystanders. What can we do to stand up for that person? And again, and this other person, I'm telling you, that one who helped raise the funds for him, if you met him today, the guy's a gem of a person. He's a family man and he's a pillar of his community. As a 14-year-old, he was, he needed he still had some work. He was a work in process. He got corrected, but in the meantime, the rest of that year, I just remember seeing that. So again, I think, just to sum this all up, we're seeing these ideas. Malika is a very, very unique idea. It's very odd. The Rav Sorotskin helps us with an angle to help explain it by suggesting it's there as a benefit for the ani, because he's the one who's bringing the bird korban. Hashem wants that ani to get everything that he's supposed to get from the korban experience, and was nervous that if it wasn't done in that fashion, he or she might not gain from the korban experience. And then we saw the chinuch that suggests that the lesson of Malika is for all of us, that we need to learn to be more sensitive to an ani, to realize that they're in desperate situations. We have to value their time. We have to help them, and we have to not cause any delays, to be sensitive to their needs. And part of being sensitive to their needs means not just helping them, as we see from Reb Chaim Ozer, but it also means to help them in such a way that they can maintain their dignity. And I would just say for all of us is that all of us have a sneaky streak in us, a devious streak in us. This is an opportunity that we can use that midah, for something positive. Figure out how can we help somebody without perhaps them knowing that they were helped, and we can feel good about it, and at the same time help them maintain their dignity. There was one more item on here, but we're out of time. We'll save that for another time. All right, I want to thank everyone for joining. I'm going to just stop the recording. If